But what I do is, the way that I coyote trap is I'm looking to catch the maximum per square mile because I do a lot of predator work. And you got to think, the highest numbers of coyotes that's ever been recorded is in South Texas. That's 8 per square mile. And if you're just picking 1 or 2 off each farm, you're not doing very good at that. But if you really block up all those travel ways, and Mississippi's probably got 5.5 to 6 coyotes per square mile from where I trapped over in the Delta. I've never really trapped up in outside of the Delta of Mississippi. That's a lot of coyotes. I mean, that's almost like Texas. Y'all are almost like Texas. And if you cover all those up, it'll blow your mind. What it'll do is it'll teach you that we don't know as much about location as we think. Because you'll be setting all these main ones up, and then you'll catch them. Or you start setting them all up, you catch them everywhere. It's kind of like, have y'all ever went out to a big field and got a fence around it, and you hang snares around that field, and then you start catching coyotes because there's hair in the fence. They're showing you where they're at. And then all of a sudden, you look around one day and you go, there's no reason for this coyote to be here. There's no road, there's no crossing, there's no feature, there's no reason whatsoever. But there it sets the coyote in front of you. Then after a while, you start thinking, why do we think we know where they're going? Because, I've never figured it out. So I concentrate on those travel ways, is what I do.
Is there any such thing as having too much bait or lure in the area? Or?
Just mix it up. If I'm doing a small place and there's a bunch of travel ways, like QDMA land, the way that they block that up, and you'll have old pine, then you'll have CPR, then you'll have or CRP, then you'll have 8-year hardwood growth, and you'll have a big forest, and you'll have a field, and that's a lot of traps to cover all those because there'll be a road between them. So when I did that study for Georgia, I think on that 1,800 acres, I think the most traps that I had to cover that was, the way that I trapped was somewhere around 130 on 1,800 acres. And we only took 18, but it took 2 years for them to find any more coyote sign on that property. So, we decimated them by doing it this way. But I'll put in bait, then I'll put in bait and lure, then I'll bury a beaver, then I'll, put a flat set, then I'll set on drop-ins, and then I'm constantly trying to mix it up instead of doing the same thing.
26 off of 300 acres.
That's a lot.
There was times it'd go a month or 6 weeks where I wouldn't, and I guess I caught the local ones out, and I guess it was like a territory. I guess some moved in.
I would say if you were to look at that farm on Google Maps and bring it out, you're going to find out there's a lot. It's probably what the old guys used to call crossings, and they're going to mix around. And you got to think, up until probably March, very few of those coyotes live on that farm. So they're running everywhere. So, your population blows up, and then you'll know how many's on there once they pair up, because it's just the ones that live there. So it gets really small.
Well, I never had over 8 traps out. Do I need to put more traps? Or?
The way that I'm just telling you how I do it. That's just that every travel way. Because another thing that happens is you've got your locations. Like if you're setting 8 on 300 acres, so you got your locations. Like say that's a type A location. That's one we all think about when it comes to trapping for whatever it is, whatever the feature is. Once coyotes get in contact with a caught coyote a couple of times, what you'll start seeing is it kind of goes dead. Well, they don't really go dead. The coyotes veer off to get around that spot. But what happens when you set the way that I set, they're coming in contact with different sets and different equipment. So there's never any chance for them to get reprieved, because wherever they're going. And if you look at studies from APHIS, the old Denver research stuff and the government studies, if you look at a coyote's area that they live, we have this idea how they move through there. It looks like a spider web when they put collars on there. So it's not like there's really more places they go than others. it's kind of an old myth. Trappers say they do more on the edge or they do more, in these. But when you look at the actual collar studies, it's just haphazard. They're going everywhere hunting for food. So that's the reason I do what I do.
See, I have a cattle farm about 1.5 miles up the road, and I won't catch nothing for a while, and I figure a cow has died up there.
Could have.
That's where they're at. And then I won't even hear one.
But a lot of it's on a smaller farm. If you've got things that are funneling them through, especially before they pair up, I mean, you can catch a lot. That's, like when I took instruction from Ron and Pete Leggett for fox, they'd go to a 300-acre farm and set 2 traps within 2 feet of each other, and they'd go to another farm. But they spent years figuring out the crossing on that farm, and they wouldn't waste their time anywhere else. They're doing 17, 18 fox a day doing that. They're really working on the crossing.
How many fox would you say would be on that 300 acres?
This depends on the 300 acres. Like where I'm from in Tennessee, there's big chunks of ground we ain't got no fox. And then I can get up close to a city and catch 30 or 40, That's what it is down here.
I caught 2 gray fox off of it, 1 bobcat, and the rest of them 26 cows.
Well, that kind of makes sense on the gray fox. They pair up and they defend that. It's a lot different from reds. So, yeah. And once you catch them, you pretty much got to wait till someone else finds the open ground and sets up shop a lot of times.
Got a lot of coons. I set out for coons, but just, turkeys and like that, deer is what I'm trying to manage.
Most coon live, according to studies, within a quarter of a mile to a half a mile. That's their life, their whole life. So 300 acres, there's a bunch of those in there. Plus they're feeding through. I mean, you get breeding season on coon, you got big woods on one side and big ones on the other. You'll have males going through there all winter long to find females that they hadn't serviced yet. What else can we talk about?
About lures. We're both first season trapping. Don't really know much about what lures.
All mine, man, all mine.
Huh?
Just mine.
Just yours?
Yeah. Lures can be tricky, and people overcomplicate it, I think. You've got different type of lures. You got baits, which is basically food, and the way we do it now, it's more sophisticated, but it's food. And then you've got gland lures, which is a territorial type thing, which really don't work that good until they start thinking about breeding season. So that's not something you'd want to go out in October, November, December to really rely on. And you've got sexual lures, which will have a lot of stuff like lovage and asafoetida and these other chemicals in there. And that gets them kind of randy, And then you've got basically a lot of times just food in lures, a base. And then you'll have curiosity, which could be something like, say, Tonquin, Siberian deer musk. Well, that's not something they're used to smelling. And what a lure maker does is he combines one or all 4 of those together to come up with these different ones. And what I can see on my side of being a lure maker is guys try to think that there's a magic formula or there's a one thing is the best, and it's really not, because I'll tell you a story. I had a friend that lived up in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's an hour and a half from me. I'm an O'Gorman student, which at your age you may not even know who that is, because that's from way back. But he had a lure called Plenty Coyotes, and I watched him use that in Montana, and we slayed coyotes in Montana. So I bought a bunch of it. Where I live around Dunlap, Tennessee, I couldn't pay a coyote to pay attention to that. Now, I gave it to my friend up in Knoxville, and he slayed coyotes with that. So it's kind of up to you to kind of play around till you find, because what happens with lures, lure makers, me included, we have kind of pet things that we do, and all lure makers are different. And what you'll find eventually is a lure maker 2 or 3 that click in your particular area, and then you'll keep doing that. Now, worrying about if it's October, do I use this? November, do I use this? Don't really worry about that. If it's warmer, use less. If it's colder, use a little bit more, and just mix it up. That's the best thing you can do for coyotes, because coyotes learn very quick. And if you do the same thing over and over and over again, those coyotes will just completely ignore you. But you can mix it up. You know, does that help at all?
Yeah, right.
I got a question. Behind my place, I only got a small place. They got a 500-acre farm that's overgrown. They cut every damn tree in the place. I only got local bushes, cat wire. They're made in here for a four-wheeler thing. And there's coyotes galore back there. I get a lot of deer on my farm. That's not the problem. I'm close to that fence line, but I get working on my side to get the coyotes to come in.
Well, you can definitely call them in. None of them smells good, but you can definitely call them in. Like, I would go bigger than that. Like, when you skin other animals, have a place. Say, is the wind blow to you, to them, most of the time? So I'd come off of your fence line, say 100 yards, and that's where I would start dumping my animals, and it's going to stink really bad. But what'll happen is those coyotes will start coming over to see what that is on a regular basis, and they'll eat some stuff. And then you got that distance between you and that bait pile. Slim Peterson talks about, he used to go buy a bunch of eggs, crack them open in a bucket, leave them out in the sun till you couldn't stand it, and he would pour that on a whole bale of hay and do what I was telling you to do with the animal pile. And that'll last all season long, and you'll be pulling animals all season long off of that.
Second question. I've never trapped coyotes before. I have foxes. I trapped them last when I was stationed up there in the first one. When you're taking the hides off, do you leave the feet on there, or do you cut it off and branch out the elbow?
That depends on how you're going to sell it. If you're going to tan it or sell it to someone that's going to tan it,
No, I'm just going to sell it as fur.
no, you don't want that on there. Because unless it's a black one or something that someone's eventually going to use for taxidermy,
Black one, I may tan it for myself.
when they put it in a tumbler, those claws are going to chew up everything. So they don't want that in there.
So you cut it off out the elbow?
Yeah, because you don't want to have a big hole up here.
No.
It'll shrink up on you. Yeah. What else we got?
What first got you started trapping?
What got me started is, where were you at in Alaska?
Way back.
No, where?
Kodiak.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't there. I was in Fort Wainwright in the military, and a good friend of mine still today came in, and he was all excited, and I had no idea what for. And he got into trapping because he watched a video. So he went out and bought all this crap. He was an officer. He bought all this stuff, and he was telling everybody about everything he was going to catch. Now, I was up there, and I've always been big into hunting and fishing and stuff, and I was getting cabin fever at Fairbanks, Alaska at 40 below zero every day. And I started listening to him, so I went to the video store, and I rented Mike Glapimski's Wilderness Trapping, and it was about catching marten. So I went to a yard sale the next weekend, and I bought a bunch of 110s and 120s at a yard sale. In Alaska, you can buy traps at the grocery store. So, I mean, totally different place up there. And, yeah. So then I went out, and by using that video, on the snowshoes, I put out a 5-mile line on snowshoes. I did everything that he said to do, just mimicked it on the side of the tree. The first trap I ever set had a male marten in it. I was hooked. But the main reason it got me started is being enlisted in Alaska before taxes only made $1,400 a month. Milk was $5 a gallon. This was in the early 90s. Gas was $3 something a gallon. You know, everything was expensive. I got paid $80 for that martin. I mean, it was like a pay raise. So it didn't take me long to figure out if I go catch 2, 3, 4, 5, I can make as much doing this in the winter as I can in the military. So that's how I got started, you know. So it's not the normal, my granddad took me out, or we grew up, I grew up in Phoenix City, Alabama. So back in, it had been about 81 or 82, I think. There was this guy in Columbus, Georgia that bought beaver. We didn't know what a trap was. We didn't know there was a fur market. We didn't know what he was doing. But he paid us $40 for every beaver we brought him. So we'd get out in these little bitty John boats at night with a light with 22s. And sometimes we could shoot and retrieve 5 or 6 beaver. At $40 a piece, I was making more than my parents were working 2 jobs. So that kind of led me up to the other, but I didn't know what it was going for. I just know this guy gave us money for a big rodent. That's all. Any other questions? You can't be shy now.
On tan it. Okay, I've never tanned one. How would you cut it around a mile of coyote or eyes?
I don't know, man.
Oh, you don't tan them?
No. I've never really got into that. I mean, the only things I've ever tanned are just stuff that I skin normally and sent them off and they did it. As far as taxidermy, I don't know. You know, because that's kind of what, when they're splitting the lips and turning the ears and, yeah, I don't know all that.
As far as general predator sets, are you usually targeting a specific species, or are you just setting a general predator? Or are you targeting bobcats or coyotes?
Are y'all 2 friends?
Yeah.
Okay, I want y'all to make a pact right now. If either one of you uses the term general predator set, y'all owe the other one 25 push-ups. So what if that ever comes out? The reason I say that, you can put in a good coyote set that will eventually accidentally catch a fox or a cat or a raccoon. You can put in a bobcat set that may catch a coyote or a fox every now and then, or you can set a fox trap and eventually catch something. If you're gonna be good at trapping, you need to set a trap for the animal that you're setting at. So if you were to go with me and there's red fox, coyotes, and bobcat in an area, if it looks like a bobcat location, I'll put in a bobcat set, which will never hardly ever catch a coyote because it scares them too bad. If I'm doing a coyote set, it's a lot of open sets. There's no blocking, a lot of flat sets. That's good for coyotes, but you'll miss most of your fox and most of your cats. So if I'm in a location that I think all 3 animals are working, I'll put in a cat set, a coyote set, and a fox set. And I will always outproduce a general predator set. It's more work, but you catch more fur. So, you know, instead of trying to come up with something that's just good for everything, stay away from that. You'd be better off just to, you know, do the individual ones, because they're all different in how they work a set. So you owe him 25 push-ups when we get done. Any other questions?
What would you use a lure for fox?
Do you mean like a name?
You know, I mean, what out of your stuff?
I would use probably muskie or fur check for strictly fox. Yeah, and there's a lot of good lures out there. The biggest thing, especially getting started, try no more than 3 guys' lures. Don't buy 1,000. You know, buy 4 or 5 from one guy and 4 or 5 from another and another, and then get in the habit of, if you're putting a set in, at least for the first couple of years, mark down what the set was, what was in the hole, and what you catch. At the end of the year, treat it just like you would anything else, and you'll see things that really stand out and things you wasted your time with. Get rid of what's bad, keep what's good, repeat that process, and eventually you're really rocking on what you're doing, you know.
I couldn't catch anything with that plenty of coyotes there if you're talking about the dormant.
See, it's a great lure. It's just not.
I throwed it away.
Yeah.
I tried for 2 years and never caught them. Not nothing. The same place I'm catching these up.
Well, see, I know what those lures are, and where I'm at, I mean, I can make those lures. His government call is only 2 ingredients off of plenty coyotes, and I can kill stuff with government call. But I mean, just that little bit of difference, you know, of what
You can kill them with?
government call from O'Gorman, you know, and it's only 2, and they're minor ingredients off of one to the other of what it is.
Say on a whole set, how do you put wool in it and bait? Or?
My whole sets are always done, if I can, with an auger. I've got a TS Steel BT45 auger. So it's 2-cycle. It's got a good clutch so I don't break my arms. And I try to make my holes about that deep. And I can do it quick. You know, especially Mississippi, you can do it quick. And you can get that in and then what I'll do is I'll throw in some bait and the lure in the hole. I never put anything on the lip. I don't put anything on the outside. But it's so far deep they can't get to it. And what I've learned from using trail cams, I can keep a coyote at a set in a hole that deep for an hour and a half. He'll come back over and over and over again. I'll catch that coyote most of the time, just pure luck, if nothing else. When I run holes like that and test them, the average time of a coyote's about 15 seconds. Yeah, so if you can't get a deep hole, frustrate them some other way. Get a rock and partially cover it where it's too big for them to flip out of the way. Dig it at an angle so it's just really hard. Do something where it's just not looking in the hole and they can leave. You know, that's the, and then I don't really put a lot of grass. I don't do, if I'm using the hammer, I'll use wool because it's liquid. I just throw it in there and simple, you know.
How far do you throw it? I mean, where they can see it, or you push it
all the way in the bottom. Their nose is how they work. Think of a coyote as blind.
So you need to, that deep, I need to get
You don't have to, but it works better. Yeah, I mean, Posthole Diggers. There's an old gentleman. He
at an angle like this.
Yeah, this. I mean, what the angle is, I've never worried about it. Some of them are straight down almost. Some of them are just where it is. If it's a big hump, it's straight in because rain can't get in there. You know, I just want to have it where they can't get it. If you've got a lot of gray fox, don't get bigger than a 3-inch auger. The gray fox will go down your hole and get your stuff. So, you know, don't use, like I use a 4-inch for coyotes most of the time, unless I'm around gray fox. I'll flip that bit out if I'm around gray fox. They'll just rob me blind. Yeah, but there was a frustrating coyote is, I think, super important. There was an older guy in Georgia that used to have a set that anybody can do, and if he wasn't in a wheelchair, he could barely walk on a cane. But he caught about 200 coyotes a year for the live market in Georgia. He had a guy that went with him. He paid $5 an hour at the time, and he dug a post hole that deep. And then the old guy would hand that young guy a deer leg that he'd get from the deer processor. And he'd run a disposable stake around the bottom of it, and he would have him drive that in the bottom of that post hole. And he would move the dirt, say, had 2 humps right here, and put 2 traps on each side. And then he would have them staked farther out that way. But the coyote could come up and grab the leg, and he would put lure at the bottom, but he could never get it out of the hole. And I've done this, and what you'll see is there'll be a whole ring around that deer leg, so no matter where your trap's at, it's in the right spot, but he can't ever get it out. So I mean, that's like the ultimate frustration, because you're letting him taste it then. And like I said, over 200 a year for the live market, out of pure frustration. That's the only set he did.
I didn't realize last year that I was sitting behind another property. And I saw these big holes.
Mm-hmm.
And here I use a hole like that.
Mm-hmm.
What he was doing was taking that posthole digger and digging that thing that deep. I mean, I run my my driver down there, and I couldn't touch the bottom of it. But he was poking chickens in it.
If y'all got somewhere that's got chicken houses and they'll let you get them, since the bird flu, I can't get them anymore in Tennessee. Those 2 and 3 day old chickens that die by the thousands that are about that big, man, you put 8 or 9 of them in the bottom of one of them holes, you'll have coyotes doing somersaults trying to get to them.
I used to fox them until I started trapping when I got work over here. And I would go to the hatchery and get live bitties. Some of them had the beak crossways, and, you know, they pull and put them out where I was with my dog. I mean, it was you just turn out and they were right on. Them things here, them things keep them for miles. Of course, the coyotes find it, something else. You know.
Right.
I want to run pop.
Yeah.
They definitely. But now, I've tried deer meat for bait, and I hadn't had very good luck with it.
Fresh deer meat, you're better off to let it taint. And when I talk about taint, if you put it in a 5-gallon bucket ground up, you're going to think it's rotten. But what you want to look at is eventually it's going to start turning gray on top and kind of greenish, and it'll be bubbling up the side. If you take a spoon and you flip that over, you only want that gray stuff to go down about that far in a 5-gallon bucket. Then you mix it all up, you'll have something.
Are we talking about like liver and all that, or are we talking about meat?
Meat. Liver's totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
None of that.
If you're going to do liver, which is a great ingredient, it's going to water out, and it's not going to do it when you want it to. So if you put a 5-gallon bucket, build up something with some bricks with some small screen about halfway up, put your liver up here that you've already preserved, and just let it sit. All that liquid will drain through, and you can just take the good stuff out. Because what'll happen is that stuff on the bottom is really hard to preserve, and it'll make whatever you're making turn into this liquid soup one day, and it could be next week or next month, but it's going to do it.
I'll probably just buy my bait from you there, my lure there. What about, you was talking about earlier when I was talking to you up there about burying beaver or?
Yeah, I do a lot of berry bait sets, especially like if I go to a job and I do really good one year and really good the next year, and then I start setting and I feel like it's not working right, I go to buried bait sets. So I'll catch beaver, I'll skin them, get the casters, take my back straps for dinner, and then I'll have that carcass, and I'll take a wolf fang around the neck, it's disposable stake, and one around its tail at the base, and I'll dig a hole about yay deep, just with a shovel, and I just kind of throw it out to the sides, and I'll set that beaver in there, back up, where its back's coming up, and I'll put those on an angle, the disposable stake, so it's pinned. So you can't get out there and flip it. You can't do anything. And then I'll just throw that dirt right back on top. Since it's fluffy, it's going to stand out. It takes about 5 days for those gases to start coming through that ground. But once it does, that coyote's on it. And I will put 3 or 4 traps around it, about probably about 10, 12 inches back on drags. And I've caught triples on one beaver in one night. But because this coyote gets over here and gets caught up, and he's circling and whining and peeing, and it builds this excitement. Then the other one comes up and he's not very cautious, he gets caught, and you can repeat that over and over again on a group of coyotes.
You run a lot of drags?
Almost 100%. Yeah, because I don't want to deal with remakes. You know, my remake is really embarrassing to someone that uses stakes. My hole's still there, my lure's still there, my trap bed is perfect where the animal pulls it out of the trap bed. I've got to set it back in and wiggle it, put some peat moss over the pan, sift it back over. That's my remake. I don't have mud, I don't have all the stuff you got to deal with a stake. And that's the main reason I use them. Plus, I'm too lazy to use a hammer if I don't have to. I can set more by doing that than I can by doing this.
Well, I've been leaving mine in the ground doing it the same places year after year. Would it be better if I went to drag?
I think so.
How far will they go with it?
A good drag, not very far. There's two drags. I designed one. Chip Davis, which is y'all's president, designed the other. They're both about equal. Just don't tell him I said that. The one I designed is saber tooth. You can get them from F&T. His, you can, I don't know if he's even set up here, but you can get them from Chip. In a hay field, a coyote won't get but a few feet. I've got videos on YouTube with coyotes in traps. I take the drag, throw it up in the air, and he can only get 5 or 6 feet. But that is not the re-rod looking things, those cheap drags. That is not one of them. These are about $100 to $120 a dozen. They got points. If you were to, you got a kid that's got too much energy, hook him up to that drag in your yard. He'll move it 2 or 3 inches and he'll get about a foot at the end of the day and be exhausted. Because when they do break it loose, it automatically hooks up again. The angle goes under the roots and he can't really do anything. If it's on later in the season here where you got your cotton fields or your soybean fields, there's nothing out. As soon as they hit out of that field, they're caught. Like Chip's got to go farther than me because where he traps are huge fields. Where I'm in Tennessee, we don't have those. But very rarely, I've only had one time in Missouri that a coyote's been over 40 feet, ever. Cats never move it. Raccoons never move it. They just physically can't.
You just cover the chain up and hit?
That far away from the set. I'm lazy. I consider it energy efficient.
How much chain do you have on yours?
8 feet.
8 feet? Mm-hmm. And just cover it up?
Yeah, I just throw it off to the side and throw some grass clippings over the chain or something like that just to get that far away. I mean, that chain's not going to bother a coyote. With cats, I just drop it right next to the set. I use it for blocking.
You have a dog to find?
With good drags, you don't need it.
Well, that's the reason I never went to them, because I thought I'd have to get a dog to do that.
No. You get a saber tooth or one of Chip's, you may have one aggravating situation every 2 or 3 years. You go to cheap drag, you're going to have an aggravating situation every time you catch something. Like J.C. Connor's drags are great drags for their purpose. J.C. designed those in the 80s when everybody was stealing from everybody. His drag is designed to get them a couple 100 feet away from the set. And they'll do it too, but you got to go find them. The drags that me and Chip use, it's a laziness efficiency factor. It's just fast. And the thing about drags, when you know you should pull that line and move it, but you don't really want to because you're tired, a drag is nothing but stepping on the trap and rolling around the drag and you're done. I'm not pulling, I'm not doing, so I can move faster over and over again because of a drag.
Tell me about using the chicken again. Tell me about that. Because I got chicken houses everywhere.
Okay. When they get those chickens in, they're real little. They're just like, So while they're just little fuzz balls, they always have a big die-off when they first get them. Yeah. What I used to do is have not the big deep freeze, but one of those that's about that long, and I take it to the chicken house with buckets. And I would say, and I knew the guy, and I'd go, as you go around, just use my buckets and throw the chickens in there and put them in the freezer, and then call me when the freezer's full, because I could get 4 buckets this way. I get 8 buckets in that freezer. And then I would take those out because they spoil really quick. I would take those chickens out, dig my deep dirt holes, just grab a handful of them, throw them down in there.
You ever smoke them? Put them through a smoker?
I'm lazy, man.
Okay, all right.
Any step I can cut out, I'm trying to cut it out.
Because my buddy, he believes in putting them through a smoker.
Well,
and they smell good.
Oh yeah,
Anybody
no doubt.
can.
Yeah. You could. I mean, I never did.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
What about cats? You tell me, I'm going after bobcat this year. I'm going to get me one too.
Okay. What do you need to know?
I am in the woods. I am in the woods. That's all that I got around. No, forget these fields and soybean, forget that. I'm in the woods.
Okay.
Pine and hardwood.
Okay.
Pine and hardwood. Them cats, are they traveling the branches basically?
A lot of them do.
Okay.
What you want to think about for bobcats, if you were going to go, like you probably grew up rabbit hunting,
Sure.
that's where you want to go cat hunting.
Okay.
If you used to quail hunt,
I used to.
that's what you want to find that.
Okay.
Those two things in water is what I key on in woods.
Okay.
I try to find where there's the most food and the barrier of the water.
Okay.
I set snares on the high trails for cats,
Okay.
and I set footholds at the rabbit and quail places. That's what I'm really.
Size foothold.
I use a number 3 or 4 Sleepy Creek Long Spring. Yeah.
Now, what kind of lure or bait are you using?
I use cat collector
Okay.
and the smell of an animal, smell of a cat. So you can get that through urine, a fresh gland lure, cat turds, feral cats, whatever.
I got plenty of feral cats.
Yeah, give them a kitty litter box,
Yeah.
throw you some carpet in the bottom of it, let them pee down through there, cut that carpet up, and you've got the body odor of a cat. That's what you'll want to use.
All right.
Thought about that.
Oh, it'll be rough, dude.
There ain't nothing stinks worse than cat pee. Male cat pee. Lock him up in a room and see what happens.
Well, that carpet will last for 2 or 3 years.
It won't never come out. Not cat pee.
You ain't asked no question. So I gotta impress you so you take me red fishing.
What you're saying is the stuff that we're using, and you're right on target with everything. You know, about the drags. People don't believe it till you use it. We use it, you know.
Now, did you start with the cheap drags too, like everybody else?
Well, my buddy did.
That didn't take long, did it?
Saber tooth. It's amazing how that goes. Ryegrass and Hill is not joking. Trout hole will be there in that cave. It's amazing. And about not digging holes, driving stakes. Taking the trap line up, oh God, it's a dream. Step on the trap line,
Do you use shocker springs on yours? Do you use shocker springs?
I do. I need to preference that. I do. What he asked, do I use shock springs on my traps? I do on the ones that I use for bobcats. Because a bobcat, if you catch one on trail cam and you got your camera low and the set's like 10 foot away, what you're going to see is nothing. That bobcat, when he gets caught, most of them go up to here and that fast. What the shock spring does is takes that energy out just long enough to set the trap. What most people think about a shock spring as far as fighting the trap, I could care less. For me, it's just to keep that cat, when he hits the end of it, to give it some give. Because I've had cats on camera come out of CDRs 4 foot off the ground because they hit the end of the chain. And with drags, again, I don't have to worry about that anymore because they can't jump 8 feet up in the air. You know, so they'll go up and come down.
If you got too many little trees and brush around, is that a bad thing as far as trapping a cat, as far as him being able to snatch loose?
No. They don't do like a raccoon.
That's what
I mean, raccoon will grab a hold and just,
Oh, man.
yeah, a cat doesn't think that way.
He don't think that.
Yeah. Most cats and coyotes will be asleep in your set in about 30 minutes. When they realize they can't get out of the trap, they don't have our imagination. So they're like, I need to rest. And they go to, it's the most boring thing to see on a trail cam you've ever seen. Now, when you show up in the morning, they're tearing the world up because of you. But yeah, they only fight for about 30 minutes. They may get up once in a night and jerk on it and go, okay.
I got a nephew last year that borrowed a trap from me, and he set it and Cody, a black one. We got a few black ones around. By gracious, a copperhead come by and bit the coyote and died. He died.
I never had that.
Got him on camera, the snake biting the coyote.
But you don't use it on drag.
And of course we got snakes on the road. I mean, killed the coyote. Killed him.
I ain't never seen that one.
Yeah, that's a big copperhead.
Any other questions? Y'all are awful quiet back there.
Can't hear you.
Do what? Oh, okay. So what other questions y'all got? You're new, you gotta have questions. I won't make you do push-ups.
Give me a minute.
I will give you advice being new. There is a cycle all trappers go through, and if you cannot get in this cycle, you'll be better off. When you first start trapping, you're going to do some really goofy stuff, and you're going to catch animals. And then one of these days, you're going to think, I know what I'm doing. And you're going to start reading more and looking at videos more, and you're going to get really complicated in how you're looking at trapping. And then when you get about my age, you're going to go, I caught as much when I didn't know what I was doing. And it was a whole lot easier. I trap more like probably you do than you want to trap like you do. Super simple. Keep it simple always. If it starts getting complicated, I promise you, you're doing it wrong.
That's like life. We make it complicated.
Yeah.
It really ain't complicated.
Yeah, I did an interview with Mike Schaefer out of Louisiana. First year he tried to catch mink in Louisiana, he caught 100, 110, something like that. He started reading magazines on how to catch mink. He didn't catch 2 the next year.
Oh my God.
So he forgot everything he learned and went and got brand new 110s again, kept the string, the trigger straight, set them in them trails and went over 100 again. So people like us can really confuse people. Just don't let us. What else we got?
What? Go ahead.
8 feet, 8-ish. Yeah, plus whatever's on the trap. Yeah, most of the time I'll have one at the trap, one where the original one is, and then one right before the drag itself. I wish someone would make a chain that was just swivels.
So you said 3 swivels?
Yeah, the one that's at the base of the trap, the original one that's on the end of the chain, and then one right before the drag itself.
How are you getting the video? Every time we try to set trail cameras at our set, quick as that camera, we can see his eyes. And quick as it goes off, he's gone.
Well, the equipment that I used, and it's eventually just fell apart, but it was based off of the old Wildlife Eye, their boxes, and it uses a real video camera. So you don't have all that stuff going on, and it's digital, so there's no tape or anything, and that's what I was using. I don't even know how to work a trail cam. When I say trail cam, I mean that thing, but I know they have them here. I've got a 21-year-old helper that runs all the trail cams for me. What else? What other kind of questions? Come on now. Is that it?
So what got you into lure making?
Curious. Just curious. Yeah, I mean, when I was in Alaska, they had an Alaskan, I think it's called the Alaskan Trapper's Handbook, and it talked about making your own bait for marten. And it was, you go catch a bunch of salmon, you cut off all their heads, you put it in a bucket, and you let it rot down. Well, Alaska's only got a winter of about 2 months. I mean, a summer of 2 months. So I did that in the spring. I went out when it started freezing to take it out. It was in that stage that you never want to open a bucket of fish. And I was like, there ain't no way. It's still sitting under a tree in Alaska as far as I know. I mean, it was beyond nasty. And then I was like, well, how does that work? And then I started doing a little research, and they're like, you got to put it in a hot box. So you get a freezer, you put a light bulb in there, it extends your season. And then I was buying lure from Dean Wilson, which is a famous fur buyer up there that I didn't know it at the time because I didn't know anything about trapping. And he was selling me a Martin call lure. And one day he's like, do you want the tinctured or do you want the full powered? And I didn't know what the difference was. So of course you want the full power. I didn't realize what that was because I'm mixing that up in my basement, you know. And he said you mix it in Vaseline. So the first lure I ever made was just Vaseline and skunk, and I started catching stuff, and that just kind of curiosity just took over, you know, of how to do, because I made some stuff, some old recipes. Up there, guys actually fox trap with fermented blueberry jelly. They make the jelly, but they don't preserve it, and they let it ferment. And I was catching some red fox on fermented jelly. Any other questions, guys? You talking about where the trails are going up and down? Oh, you set 3 or 4 snares in the trail? Yeah, I mean, there's no way that you're gonna. I've heard all kind of stuff about you break up their stride 4 foot or 3 foot in front of it. The only thing I've ever found to be really consistent with otter snares is put 3 or 4 in every trail. You know, because they're going up and down, you just don't know. So, I mean, that's the way I deal with it anyway. Any other questions? All right, we're done. Thank y'all.